Hello everyone. I was thinking we should get started. It's 1:30, sorry. I hope you all had a lovely lunch. I'm gonna talk about HTML. And my name is Ida. I'm Colombian on a lot of like social medias like Twitter and GitHub. GitHub is a social media, right? I work for a company called Futures, and I also have a little accessibility initiative on the side called T12T, and we actually have a meetup coming up now in March. So go to meetup.com and look us up and sign up. So, and yeah, right. I have a little newsletter. I'm doing all this commercial now. That you can sign up to if you want to. How many of you like recognize this and know what it means? Okay, great. I'm really happy that not everyone here was like this. Yes, yes, yes. Because then maybe this talk wouldn't be for you. Or it would be like this lovely everybody get together having a good time talk. We'll get back to this. Why talk about HTML? Well, like the base reason that I have is that nobody does. So like, why not? And also, there is a lot of bad HTML out there. And it actually hurts real people. So it's not like a fake problem, it's a real problem. So I think we really should start talking about it. Because when it comes down to it, this is what the web is built upon. Like everything that's out on the web is built upon HTML. And we don't talk about it. So, this is a developer. This developer got a name. I actually asked my partner for a good name suggestion, and he suggested Hannibal. So, that's neutral and cute, right? So, for short, we're gonna call the developer Honey. Honey got a new exciting project. It's like all bells and whistles, gonna be awesome. Like how much new technique can we like put into this? Like how can we build it in a super exciting way? So Honey does what every developer does when they get a new product. He sits down and he starts thinking like, how should I build this? And there are all these cool things out there, like all these frameworks. Should we use React, Angular, maybe Ember? What about Vue? Vue is like the most popular right now, right? And then, we have the handler state. He's getting ahead of himself. We can use Redux. What about the middleware? We can use Thunk or Saga. Or, what about the data? Where should it be stored? Can we use GraphQL? Or what about headless CMS? That's really cool. For localization, we can use this phrase app. And also styling. Can we have JavaScript in CSS, or was it CSS in JavaScript? I don't even remember. We can have functional programming in here. This Lambda library is awesome. And also, what about AI? Can we put that in here? Or maybe types. Types is really good if you want to have something that's like strict and secure, right? And also testing, and browsers. And also, these things need to be connected, and now there's a loud screaming. It turns out that Honey's product manager suddenly appear. His name is Arne, and he's kind of mad, because turns out this project should have been done yesterday. Too bad. So, Honey goes into something that some developers might be familiar with, depression, anxiety. Like, why is he doing this? Like, everything is stressed. He can never do something cool, new, exciting. Like, really terrible. But, he gets down to it. It's his job after all, so he does what also most of us developers do. He starts Googling, and he copy-pastes a lot of things. And actually, he gets into this, and he makes it. Like the project is actually launched on pretty much on time, and he got a lot of cool things. He managed to put in some of the thoughts that he had in the beginning, and he's super happy with himself. And his project manager, Arne, is also super happy. But then, after a while, Arne is not that happy anymore. Because it turns out that the end result of this project, well, it turned into like a massive amount of HTML, and it was mainly divs and spans. Is this a problem? Turns out it was. It was actually bad, very bad. And this is bad for search engine optimization. And turns out it's also bad for accessibility. Like, it's really hard to use this application. And, you know, the company that Honey works for even gets an angry email from a lady that, you know, said that she feels that they have been discriminating against her, and like now she might even sue them. And they got an angry article in the newspaper, and everything is like really bad, and the company gets a bad reputation, and Honey gets depression, anxiety again, because this was not how it was supposed to be. Then Honey gets mad, because, come on, this is not his job. The browser should have taken care of this. It's the browser who hasn't done their job. Like, why should he, a developer who is already stressed out, need to think about this? It's not his fault. So, I mean, we could have ended here and like let angry Honey rebuild the whole application to please everyone, and then Honey would be bitter and grumpy and never find happiness in life again. But we're not gonna do that. Instead, because I'm kind of in charge of this, so I'm gonna send Honey to school. So here's the school of HTML. Really pretty and cute. And we send Honey to this school. And the first lesson here is history. Fun, fun, fun. No, Honey doesn't think so. He doesn't like history. But that doesn't matter, because he still has to learn a bit here. So let's get back in time. And first, we're gonna address like why history. I mean, this is kind of like the usual argument for why you need to learn history. So it's important to understand where things are coming from. And also, when it comes to HTML, a lot of things are pretty messy, and it's easy to get mad about this and like, why isn't it beautiful and easy to use and logical? Well, it kind of comes down to things on the web. I mean, we can add things to the web, but we can't really remove things. So that's kind of a problem if you want things to be simple and beautiful and logical. So, well, back in the 90s, Tim Berners-Lee invents HTML. Yeah, it's super cute. And everything is awesome, because now you can have documents and they are linked, and you can read a lot of things. And then there's a little pop band where Tim Berners-Lee works, and they want to have their picture on the web, so the image tag gets invented. Awesome. A couple of years later, the form tags is invented, and now you can actually interact. You can send things in, and you know, you can collect data. Awesome. And then we'll have also, like in the 90s, the browser war, the first one, and this is between web browsers. And back in the 90s, we had like two web browsers that was kind of popular, and the name was Netscape and Internet Explorer. And it was like a real war, especially like it heated up a lot in '97 when Internet Explorer 4 was released, and Microsoft decided to drop a 10 feet tall IE logo on the lawn of the Netscape office. Just like you see, like war. And Netscape found out about this, and they flipped over the logo and put a dinosaur on top. So yeah, again, war. It was very harsh back then. Eventually, IE came out kind of as a winner, as a lot of you already know, maybe. And we also got a standard movement going on, where when it comes to HTML, I mean, because back in the 90s, you kind of competed with like features in the browsers. So Netscape, they had like blink tag, and Internet Explorer then implemented CSS, and this was how you competed. And it was like, if you wanted to build a website, you had to build 2 versions, basically, if you wanted to support both browsers. You couldn't really build one website that worked in both. So this is why the standard movement was kind of important, because this was the first time that browsers came together and actually worked towards a common goal, and that was that all browsers should support HTML, and back then it was HTML4, and CSS1, and ECMAScript, which was JavaScript. So then it's kind of like browserware too. Like, all browsers tried to be really standard compliant. Well, of course, it kind of was like 1, 2 browsers, and then eventually Chrome and Safari and Firefox, and there were several browsers, and everything was good. And the W3C, who are the standard organ who is developing standards for HTML, they were now we are in the around year 2000. They started working on XHTML 2.0, and this was because the vision for HTML around the millennium was that you should go towards XML, because that was the beautiful future. Like, everything would be strict, and if you missed something, maybe to close a tag, then everything would break. That was how we wanted it to be. And they were working and working and working for years. And okay, Honey has a question. Yes, Honey? Alright, who is Hixie? I guess Honey maybe read my introduction to this talk and talk about something called Hixie. So, yeah, great. Hixie is actually a person, and his name is Ian Hickson, and he worked in W3C in 2004. And in 2004, there was a meeting at Adobe, a conference, and there was a vote around XHTML if they should continue working on this, or if they instead should extend HTML, the existing one, to have more features. And HTML was turned down in favor of XHTML. And Hixie was kind of mad because, I mean, he wanted apps. And he wanted to build cool stuff on the web. He don't want to have like these philosophical meetings about like this strict format that is going on for years and years. So what Hixie did was that he collected a bunch of people from Apple, Mozilla, and his own company, Opera. And they sat down and started a new specification. And their group was called What Working Group, and the specification is known as HTML5. So they decided that their first goal was to extend forms, because forms was kind of terrible and you couldn't do a lot of things. And it needed a lot of work. This HTML5 got kind of popular. So eventually the W3C decided that, well, we also gonna move to HTML5 now. Or at least like, we're gonna have a specification on the side called HTML5. They actually also did an XHTML5, because like trying to jab in XML somehow. And like, notice the difference here. There's now 2 HTML5, and the difference between them is the space. And the HTML5 with a space is from W3C, and the other one without a space is from Whatwug, as I learned that you can say it. Usually I said What Working Group, but I don't know. I recently learned that you can say Whatwug, which is really weird. We also got loads of new elements, like article, aside. We got a cool new element called video and audio, and a lot of nice things. And XHTML actually died eventually, because no one cared about it, and eventually the W3C didn't see a point and continue to work on it. So rest in peace. Yeah, moving on towards today. How does it look like? Well, today there's JavaScript. How many of you work with JavaScript? Yay, me too. And we also kind of have a browser war 3, because nowadays browsers compete in who can be who can be the best at JavaScript. It's not really called the browser war 3, I think I invented that, but that's kind of how it feels like. And W3C and the Wotwog are actually, they keep working on their specs, but there's not a lot of attention around this, and it feels like not a lot of things is happening, or is there? Well, the things that happened since I left the history is that Wotwog is now a living standard. It means that, you know, it's no longer HTML5, it's just a living standard that keeps evolving. And the latest things just get added, and there's no versions, there's just HTML. And W3C, they don't like this. They want to have snapshot versions of the standard. So they, when they were finished with HTML5, they moved on to HTML5.1. And now I see I missed 5.2. There is a 5.2 as well. And 5.2 was actually like recently released, and now they are working on 5.3. And how they do this is that they actually like take a snapshot of kind of what Wotwog is working on, and then they go through that and tweak a little and fix things. We also have new things since history time. Picture that was evolved by a lot of developers from different companies coming together and feeling that responsive images needs to be solved. We also have new input types, and we have image attributes like sizing and source set to support responsive images. And also we removed some things that wasn't really needed and that nobody used, and I guess that's why we could actually remove it. I don't even think it was implemented, some of it. So in today we write most of our HTML in JavaScript. At least I do, and I think a lot of other people do as well. Or if we don't do that, we use some kind of template language. But let's talk more about JavaScript. In JavaScript, a lot of us work with components, and this is where it gets a bit tricky, because we hide our HTML in these components, and then we inject these components in different places, and we kind of lose track of what kind of HTML is actually in there. So, is this important, and what is good HTML? Because I think that's an important question if you want to do things properly. So, if you look at the specs, today they actually say different things. So it's really hard to go to the spec and try to like, this is the good thing and this is how I'm supposed to do it. For example, the main element, it's actually have two definitions that are different in both specs. In Wotwog spec, they say that it's totally fine to have several main elements, because like you can include components with main elements and they can go together on a single page, like in a list or something, and that's fine. While the W3C says it's not fine at all. You are supposed to have one main element, because the main element is the main content of the page, and this is to make it easier for people to find the main part of the page. So in my mind, what I think is good HTML is HTML that works for people. That is the good HTML, and that's better than correct HTML according to specs. So we should be looking at what works. Yeah, okay, Honey has a question. Semantics, yeah. Go figure, it will come up. Kind of feels like the elephant in the room when you're talking about HTML. Sometimes I have a hard time for semantics. And it's because during my years as developers, I often hear that like, oh, you can't use a lot of divs because that's unsemantic. Well, this is a tweet by a developer called Nicholas Gallagher. He's been working on Twitter, among other things, and he says this, that there's still nothing unsemantic or inaccessible about using extra div elements. Doesn't make you bad at web frontend, and we need to stop teaching or shaming people to care about the wrong things. And I think the important thing here is that, you know, adding an extra div is not making something bad. It's not. It's when like you are not using the good HTML and only add divs, then it's bad. So it's okay to use divs, which is kind of non-semantic HTML because they don't mean anything. It's okay to add them, but not only. So when it comes to semantic HTML, it's actually HTML used as it was intended to use. So there are a bunch of HTML elements that have an intended use, like you have the UL or OL element that are used for ordered lists or unordered lists. And you also have paragraphs and buttons and things that means something. So, here's Sophia. She's a cool girl. She likes really weird electronic music. And she also likes using the internet. But her hands are kind of shaky. So it's really hard for her to use a mouse, for example. So she likes to navigate with the keyboard because like then she can just hit things and move on to things. So for Sophia, like to be able to navigate with the keyboard is really important. And if you use divs or spans for things that are supposed to receive a focus, like a button or a link, then, you know, life will be hard for Sophia. And then we have Connie, and Connie, he doesn't really see things as I see things. Actually, he uses a screen reader when he navigates the web, so he likes to have the web read to him. And for him to understand the web, everything that he is read to him has to have a meaning. So if there is something that looks like a button but is actually a span with an image, then Connie wouldn't understand it. So it's important for us to be inclusive. And for these people, like, good HTML is not really a feature, like something that's kind of nice to have, is required. Otherwise, they can't take part. So, fourth lesson, how are we going to get good at HTML? And there's a lot of ways for us to do this. We have, there's a lot of resources out there. There's good methods that I think is kind of forgotten. And there's also a lot of tools that we can use. So, yeah, okay. Honey has a question. Why don't browser take care of this? Right. So, yeah, I remember in the beginning, Honey was kind of mad at the browser not fixing the problems that he had with the application he built. Like, he thinks that, like, they should take care of it. So, let's think about this. I mean, what if the browser would actually take care of all the things? What would happen? Well, the browser would say, for example, here's your button. I designed it for you and it's perfectly accessible. And it's super ugly. And you can't change it. Well, that's no fun. Because we want to have some kind of freedom on the web. And we don't want everything to look the same. So, for us to have this freedom, we also have the responsibility of taking care of things. So I'm really sorry, Honey, but you kind of have to choose between being creative and building things to your way, or, you know, be a slave to the browser and just accept everything that's coming back. So there's no, like, in between here. Yeah, so what about, like, how we should think when we mark up pages and use HTML? I think one good thing is to just skip the presentation and the design totally when you start. Think about the whole thing, like try to like remove the colors and everything. And a good way of doing this is something that it's called the X-ray method. Has anyone here heard of the X-ray method? Okay, no one. Okay, that's great. I think it's a great way of trying to choose the best HTML for the job. I first read about it in a book by a company called Filament Group. It's a book about progressive enhancement, and they talk about this method and how they use it in a way that, you know, you take your design, you hold it up to the light. No, I'm just joking. But you try to see through it, and you break it down to each component and try to figure out, like, what is the purpose here? And when you have figured out the purpose, you try to map that to an HTML element. And that's kind of how you choose your element. So it takes a bit of practice, but I think when you start getting into it, it kind of flows. And you don't get stuck and hang up on visual things. Because when it comes down to it, HTML is first there to give something a meaning and not to make something visually appealing. That's CSS job. And then after you are done with the proper HTML elements, like you have put your headers there, you have put your form elements there, you have put your paragraphs in the right place and the buttons and the links and everything that means something, then you can get to styling and you can wrap things if you need to. Like, it's okay to use a div or a span if you need them, but you have to remember that even though they are kind of harmless, they're also useless. They never mean anything. And yeah, to be a bit harsh, whenever you see a span with a click event, like on-click on it, you should kind of like, okay, warning, warning, something is wrong here. Yeah. So let's go through a couple of misunderstood elements. First, we have this, a link versus a button. It's a bit tricky, especially now in JavaScript land, when a lot of times we are working on like this single view that keeps changing and evolving. And I mean, how should you think? Like, what is a link and what is a button? I mean, first, for me, it's kind of like, does it make sense to have an href here? Because all links or a tag should have an href attribute. Otherwise, something is wrong. It doesn't make sense. It's probably a button. And also, like, does this direct you to a new view or like a new section of the page? Then it makes sense to have a link. Otherwise, it's a button. We also have this element, a label. It's the thing that you use to describe an input element. And nowadays, like, it's kind of popular to not have descriptions above input fields. I think it's still needed. And you can argue with people about this. I think it's needed and you should try to put it there. Sometimes you might have to hide it, but like it should still be there. And it needs to be connected to the input. And you connect it with a for attribute. And you connect it to the input element's ID. And that's how they are connected. And that also gives the whole thing a bigger click area, which is good for people like Sophia, who have a hard time using a mouse. So then we have a form element. This is also kind of neglected, because in JavaScript land, I mean, you don't really need a form to post something. You needed a form in the old days when everything was going to the server, because that's how you post things. Now you don't really need it, except you actually do. Because when it comes to running an application with your keyboard, and you have a form, and you fill in the form, what you want to do is hit enter to submit the form. that only works if two things exist, and that is a form element and some type of submit button. It can be a button type submit or an input type submit. So these two things needs to be there, and then you don't have to like make it complicated by listening to key events and stuff and trying to fix it. You just need this markup. Headers are also a bit misunderstood. It doesn't really have to do a lot with JavaScript, I think. But I think the Wutvig actually did a pretty bad job here when they went out and said that it's fine, you can have an H1 everywhere. You can't, because there's no hierarchy if you have an H1 everywhere. It's not implemented in browsers. Never use multiple H1 everywhere. Like, use a proper hierarchy. And then a resource that I kind of like when it comes to looking at HTML is Mozilla Developer Network, or short MDN. They actually have a lot of good articles around learning HTML that I think, even as a developer who has been working a couple of years, I think this is kind of useful to get back to the basics and learn. They also have examples for every HTML element that is out there, and they state what kind of support there is. Some of the examples are a bit off, but this is a sort of community driven, so if you see something that is a bit off, like, you should go in and adjust it. I have something in the back of my head when it comes to the dialogue element. The example there is a bit off. I should go and adjust it. Next thing that's really good when we want to make something correct is testing. Super simple test that everyone can do. Navigate with the keyboard. Like, super simple. Like, I bet all of us can do it. And try to make sure that it works, that you can do everything that you could do if you were using your fingers or your mouse. You should be able to do that with your keyboard. And another thing that is a bit harder to do, but I think it's also worth trying out, is to use a screen reader. And if you have some sort of Apple product, then you have a screen reader. How many of you know what a screen reader is, by the way? Okay, good. It seems like most of us. A screen reader is something that this guy we saw earlier, Connie, he is using, and that he gets everything read to him, so he can use the web that way. And if you have an Apple device, you have a screen reader called VoiceOver built in. And if you are not on an Apple device, maybe you have a Windows computer, you can use a screen reader called NVDA, and it's free to download. So try that out. I think it's really useful. And of course, you will not use a screen reader the way a user who solely relies on a screen reader use, but I still think it's give you important feedback. And then there's like end-to-end testing. That I also think is kind of cool. You can use this to check if you can keyboard navigate to things, that you can hit enter in forms and stuff. And one of these tools that I have used recently is called Cypress. They're a similar tool, like I think the old one is called Selenium. I don't want to use that anymore because it's too clunky. There's also another thing called Test Cafe that's pretty cool. Cypress is built upon Chromium. It's super fast. You can run it in your terminal or you can run it visually. And you can integrate it with continuous integration. So it's awesome. We also have Lighthouse. If you use the Chrome browser, you can have this. And in Lighthouse, which is a tool in DevTools, you can run an audit. And one of their audits is for accessibility. And there you can easily find if you missed to connect a label, or your image doesn't have an alt attribute or something like that. So you can get good hints about things that you might have missed. So, we are going to our last lesson, which is the future. This is a quote for someone called Michael Rogers, who is working on Node. And he said that he's seen the future and it's full of HTML. This is actually the title of one of his Medium posts. And what he means by this is web components. This is something that I feel is really exciting and scary at the same time, because web components is a new way of doing HTML, and it gives you a lot of power and a lot of responsibility, but you can also do a lot of cool stuff. So basically, it's web components consist of HTML imports. You're using the Shadow DOM and templates and slots, and then you have custom elements. And so you can actually like name your own element. If you want to create a best input ever, you can create the best input ever, and you have a lot of power. But then you also have to think about all the things that the web browser usually think about certain elements today. So you need to fix a bit extra. But yeah. Other thing with the future, I mean, we still got 2 standards. In my opinion, I think 1 standard would be better, but it's very unlikely right now. My dream scenario is actually like 1 standard that is driven with an accessibility first approach. That would be my dream. But right now, it's 2 standards. One of them, I think, is thinking a little bit more about accessibility than the other. It also kind of feels like accessibility is an afterthought, which is kind of sad. But we have a lot of good people working on this, so yeah. Summary. Oh wait, Honey has another question. What about SEO? Okay, yeah. I mentioned that when Honey used a lot of spans and divs, it was kind of bad for SEO. So, of course, like proper HTML is also important for SEO. But what I think is important here is Ali first, always. So, I mean, first make sure that everything is good and, works for people. And then you're probably on a good way to make it SEO friendly as well. Because Google, they also want things to be accessible and good for people. And that's how they tweak their SEO algorithms. So, yeah. Again, summary. I mean, what I want you to take care of, take away from this is that you should take care of the HTML that matters. And I think we should maybe graduate Hannibal and let this little developer come out from school. And let Honey build some things with proper HTML. Because, yeah, that's what we want to do. And yeah, this cap. This is actually is a blue beanie, as you might see. And this is kind of the symbol for the HTML standard movement. And every year in November, this is celebrated around the world. And people wear blue caps to remember, like, to write proper HTML. So now you know, and now you can do this in November as well. Yeah, so let's do better HTML that works for everyone. And I also like to end my talks with this statement, that to remind ourselves like why we're doing this. And that's, I mean, we care about each other and we love the internet. So, thank you.